We are on 142A, and as far as I'm concerned, this is an exciting kit. So Madeline, you're going to kick us off today.
I'm going to turn my laptop just for a moment to see if you can see the wine bar. Is that okay?
Awesome.
Can you see it? And there's
Wow.
my dear
very
friend
cool.
and certified sommelier Paula, who
Hey,
is
Paula.
setting up the wine event tonight. Yep. Isn't that
And
a
nice
beautiful
green
space?
chairs. I dig those chairs.
And nice green chairs. We are hip, you know. And I will tell everyone that Li Meng, I'm going to reinforce what Li Meng said. We get actually a little depressed if you don't speak up and you know, opine. This is a safe zone, and in the chat room, it's utterly anonymous. You know, don't worry about it. Don't worry about saying something wrong. You're probably saying something that at least 10 other people are grateful that you said. So there we have it. So cheers to everyone. And I will tell you that I intentionally did not taste my wine today because I wanted to taste it fresh with you. Can you hear me nicely, Li Meng? Is the volume okay?
Yeah, keep talking loudly.
Keep talking loudly. All righty. Do I have maize and blue allegiance? I went to U of M, but it was the tail end of the hippie era, so I never went to a football game. So kind of, but not really. I went to class. Yes, I studied theater. I was there at 8 in the morning, and then I went to rehearsals at night, and I worked in restaurants, and here I am. So I'm picking up wine number 1. And we're going to look at it because, you know, per usual, I'm a little obsessive about looking at the appearance because sometimes people forget how important it is. And this, especially if you're doing deductive, it will help you. Oh, and the questions to consider. This is just something if your mind wants something to hold on to. You can ask yourself because, you know, sometimes the aromatics can be herbal, tree fruit, stone fruit, earthy, etc. But I'm just curious if you perceive a strong floral component in this wine, how you would characterize the acidity. And remember that all of us have different tolerances for structural elements like acidity, tannin, and alcohol. And then finally, to assess the wine's texture. You can stare at these or ignore them and just look at the wine. So visually, this wine, and I am in beautiful direct sunlight, though albeit overcast, is what I would call a pale yellow or a straw with green glints, which is what telegraphing youth to me. It moves with some weight in the glass, so it could be indicating a moderate amount of extract and or alcohol. And thank you, Li Meng. Perfect. And aromatically, sometimes I will describe aroma and flavor together and sometimes not. And because I'm tasting with you today for the first time on this wine, I think I'm going to do aroma first. And there we go. And in Li Meng's appearance, you see it is indeed a pale yellow with green glints. Bravissimo. So aromatically, this wine is, I would say, not intensely aromatic, but quite, and it meets me more than halfway. The temperature, by the way, is ideal because I poured it out several minutes before we got on, and I had poured the reds out about half an hour to 45 minutes in advance of that. So it's had some time to relax. And I immediately get sweet citrus like Meyer lemon, maybe a little bit of pink grapefruit, but don't take that too strongly to heart. It's not really strong. And then right behind that tart tree fruit, like a little bit of green and yellow pear. And then there's a tropical element to this, probably ripe, maybe a teeny little bit of pineapple. There is a florality in my glass. You may or may not pick it up. And I don't know if florality is an actual word or not, but I like it, so I'm using it. And the flowers come across to me as apple blossoms, and then lime lemon blossoms, so citrus blossom. I wouldn't say they are strident in their power, but they're distinct and very, very pretty and fresh. So, you know, just a note to self, especially if you want to be specific and or are deducing, it's a good habit to get into if you perceive a floral element to ask yourself, dried, fresh, possibly both, or you can't tell. Be honest, you're not going to impress the wine, right? One way or another. And I don't get into what I don't smell, but but if I look for that, I don't perceive evidence of oak on this wine. And I do perceive actually a little bit of a sea spray smell. I love that smell. Like you're right by, you don't even have to be by the Atlantic or the Pacific. You can be in northern Michigan by the lake. The smell that as the breezes come through that create what? The blessed lake effect, without which Old Mission and Leelanau Peninsulas can't make wine. So on the palate. One of my colleagues told me it's tacky to, swirl when you're on a Zoom, but I've been doing it for 3 years now, so I'm not going to stop now. I try to be restrained and elegant about it. The first attack to me has mouth-watering acidity, and this is a personal little trick I do. I often will take, especially if it's the first wine, take a second sip almost immediately, because my palate's reaction to the acid might be a little bit unnaturally elevated. For me, the acidity here is moderate plus, but it is integrated. It's not shutting down the flavor of the wine, and I get a mirror of the elements I perceived on my nose. So a little bit tartar citrus, so true lemon, maybe a little bit of lime and white grapefruit. And the tree fruit is pear and apple, both green for the apple, and maybe Asian for the pear. Tropical fruit, a touch of underripe pineapple. I'm chewing fresh flowers with this wine. It's great because there's a little bit of an herbal element as well. And on the palate, I'm getting other herbs such as maybe lemongrass and chamomile and verbena that all reflect a little bit of the citrus aspect. In terms of spice, I'm not getting wood spice, but I get a little exotic ginger, or any of you like that sesame candy, a lot of the Indian shops will sell it. And then there's the salinity. It is, to me, a relatively strong inorganic earth element that is delightful. No oak aging that I can perceive. They're faking me out if there is. And what I get is this mouth-watering extended finish with the salinity amplified. I also get a richness and a little bit of a lees contact flavor. In terms of oxidation, nuttiness, meaning development, it's subtle because this wine comes off quite young, and it comes across more like maybe a little bit of peanut, but I'm kind of looking for it. So overview wise, this to me is a medium bodied, mouth-watering, dry white with cleansing acidity, lots of tree fruit flavors, and a distinctive but not pushy floral aspect down the nose. And what are our options? So we've got Albarino, and that grape variety tends to express flowers, and when it doesn't, we get disappointed. Pinot Blanc, which one could liken to Chardonnay in that it is referred to, and it always sounds unaffectionate to me when I call it grape variety, non-aromatic. It's simply not as strongly aromatic as some other grape varieties. And Riesling, which is what? Highly aromatic and has, if Riesling doesn't have medium plus to high acidity, we all get, judgmental and or bummed out, right? And then our options in terms of regions, we have two from the old world, Austria and Spain. So Spain could be Albarino, Austria could be what? Riesling, Pinot Blanc. Then we've got New Zealand and California from the New World, and Riesling definitely in New Zealand, and sort of every damn thing in California, depending on where we're looking and where it's grown.
So I know that there's always hesitation. We're only at 50% participation. It's the first wine, guys. I'm going to push you a little bit. I'm going to ask Madeline my first question while you guys try to finish up, because this is anonymous. There's no wrong answer. And if you pick other, that's great. It's a teaching moment for us all. Tell us what other you're picking. So Madeline,
And frankly, I'm going to add to that, you're being a little selfish if you don't participate, because this poll helps your brethren. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Li Meng, sorry.
So I get this roundness, even though I'm getting this sharpness from the acidity. And I see it a few times now, beeswax, honeyed, apricot honey in the comments. You know, does that help us in identifying a wine that has got really good acidity, but yet is round and yet has no oak?
That's a killer question, bravissimo, Li Meng. I think that they're not mutually exclusive. A wine can have medium plus acidity and be cleansing and still have a waxy or even or a roundness to the palate. That can be the result of several things. It can be the result of lees contact, certainly, which will alter the mouthfeel. It can be the result. It can be actually a perception born of old vines, where you get a concentration that brings to mind a roundness and a depth. So, you know, yes, can a wine have that waxy character, palate coating, and be acid, you know, medium acidity or even acid deficient? Absolutely. And there's some great varieties that do that as well.
So I'm looking at the results right now. I'm ending the poll. We got to 72%, guys. So we're going to do better on the next wine and try to get 80% participation here. But in the meantime, Madeline, we have people firmly in the old world. So maybe you can say a couple of things that you agree with these folks that put us at 81% in the old world. What was it about this wine?
And I will say, you know, I probably torqued it a bit by speaking with, you know, unbridled enthusiasm about the salinity and the inorganic earthiness, aka the you know, what is that hackneyed phrase, the rocky minerality, right? But the reality is that, especially in the case of Riesling, I always say it carries a pocket of rocks around with it, so it can display that regardless of where it's grown. In the case of Albarino and Pinot Blanc is, you know, if it's classic in the term, in the sense that it's planted pervasively in an area, we're talking mostly Europe, and Albarino, we're talking Spain and Portugal. I think, yeah. So I would say that if I were really blind tasting this wine and it were not from the old world, I would go, huh, neat. Where is it grown? And why is it like this? Fair enough?
Yeah,
so
fair enough.
I like it a lot, by the way. So I'm going to have another little sip and swallow it.
Yeah, and we have about 52% on Albarino. So I'm going to share the results and I'm going to share the next slide. And as I'm doing that, and as we're going from San Francisco Bay, from Evan's house to our first location, can you talk a little bit about why it's not Chenin?
Oh, sure, because I haven't. Thank you for keeping an eye on the chat room. I have not. You know, I don't think it has, you know, Chenin is one of the hard grapes to identify, right? For me, it goes along with Gruner Veltliner too, because it's sort of semi-aromatic. I think it does not have, for me, Chenin's classic tags, especially of an illusion of sweetness, more stone fruit, peach specifically, and that kind of what we call wet wool that is almost can make you think that it's TCA, but tends to be in Chenin. Let's look where it's actually coming from. We are in Eastern Europe. We are in Austria. We are in the eastern area of the country where all of the growing region for Austrian wines are located. And this is a wonderful producer, Crocker, and I just spaced out the in Burgenland. This is a Trocken Pinot Blanc, and it is a great surprise to me because I don't expect Pinot Blanc to be this aromatic. I mean, this wine is shockingly good, especially knowing where it comes from, and the fact that it's made by a producer that specializes in dessert wines. This is an area right up, it's the eastern part of Burgenland, so it's right up against Hungary. And it enjoys or suffers from, depending on how you want to look at it, because it's good for them making dessert wine, a climate that encourages like a brass band, botrytis in the fall, where they have, you know, warm Pannonian air coming in from the east, moderated by cool air coming down from the Alps. And especially in the fall, tons of fog in the morning and it burns off to lots of sunshine in the afternoon. This is one of the, if not the warmest growing regions for grapes in Austria. And you can see there it is, Burgenland, and it is on the eastern side of, I can do Greek, I can do French. I don't know about German, but it is Neusiedlersee. Did I do
Seriously,
okay?
yeah, very good.
Yay, I practiced. Which on a good day is somewhere between 2 to 5 meters in depth. It's on the shallow side and it is relatively flat. What's funny, if you go to the Crocker website, that is fantastic in terms of information. It will tell you that it's relatively, well, they refer to it as marshland. And if there are any fluctuations of altitude, we're talking like 50 meters on a good day. They call it a little mountain. So there you have it. This is actually a 2020, which really surprises me. Northern Hemisphere. Wow, this is coming off young, mouthwatering, and it's telling me what? This thing is age-worthy. I think this wine is really elevating Pinot Blanc, in my estimation, and it shows you what happens when it's in the hands of masters. I mean, Crocker is legendary. This is a modern-looking winery. Right, it is the gentleman who was the patriarch, Alois Crocker, died at age 48, under 50 years old. This is his son. Is it Gerard? I think it's a hard G when you pronounce it in German. Now runs it with his wife, and he's totally convinced that his 2 kids that are like under 5 years old are firmly committed to following in his footsteps, right? But, the Crocker family and from the time of Gerard's grandfather were really at the forefront of modern Austrian exceptional wine production and the proponent of spectacular dessert wines in their growing region, Burgenland. But they do make Trocken wines, and this is listed as a Trocken Pinot Blanc, or I believe they call it Weissburgunder, right?
Yep.
Evan, and if you want, and those of you who are going, oh my God, am I going to have to blind taste Pinot Blanc on one of these exams? I'm going to remind everybody we do this every time. Some of the wines we show you on Master the World are for identification of quality and style, right? As opposed to the universe having to blind taste this relatively obscure example from Austria, albeit very high quality. So we've got a dry Pinot Bianco, Pinot Blanc. Remember, it's grown in Italy. It's grown in France with a vengeance, especially in Alsace, where it's blended with Auxerrois. And its acidity is firm, medium plus. And it, frankly, in a less floral example, and I think this is just, their vineyards and the expression from Burgenland and at their hands, you get that florality, but it's very close to Chardonnay in character. So you can put it in the little Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Bianco, Chardonnay camp in terms of not highly aromatic white varietals that take their expression from how they're grown and how they are made. I think it's a gorgeous wine. The finish just went away from me. Yeah. Oh, here we go.
So Madeline,
go ahead.
Sorry. So just to be clear, so what really distinguished it from the Alvarinho that was in the poll was in the aromatics on the nose. And Alvarinho would have just been really blossomed on the nose.
Not only, I think you could even say that the aromatics were very similar to Alvarinho, but not the palate. I think the palate is more sleek. I think the acidity is higher. I think Alvarinho at its best has a broader, more muscular character, not unlike Gruner Veltliner, without the expression of wood. Would you agree with that assessment, Evan?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that too. And I do think that what you're picking up on here, a couple things. Number one, you do get a little bit more texture than a lot of people would probably associate with Pinot Blanc. Your comment about being sort of Chardonnay-esque, I think is good. And frankly, most people know Austria for Gruner Veltliner first, Riesling second, Pinot Gris third, Pinot Blanc fourth, but Pinot Blanc is probably the most underappreciated and under respected grape there, and Crocker does a great style. But it is, to your point, more of a blank canvas, and you really have to work harder to coax what little aromatic there is out of it, and then give it the right environment to grow and to express itself well. And I think this wine's a terrific.
I'm
And,
guessing
you know,
that this
it's
is a
possible-
discovery.
This is for people who really want to go down, the Deadpool rabbit holes. It is possible that some of the grapes have a little bit of botrytis on it, but I wouldn't think much. And I think they would have been very careful. Sorry, Li Meng, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, for those of you who are just discovering Pinot Blancs for the first time today, congratulations. You've hit the kit gold of a new discovery. I love this comment, and I want to give Bill here an A+ for his comment about what he's learned from Tim. The reason why he did not call Alvarinho is because he didn't have the phenolic bitterness in the wine that Alvarinho, Tim has taught us, would have. And for those of you who are wondering, Tim is not here with us today because he's enjoying himself somewhere going down some cruise on some river and having a great time. So I think it's time for wine 2. We're going to move a little quicker through that so that we can catch up in just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's always wonderful about when we do these things is to be sort of referential. So if the first wine had more of a yellower color, a deeper color, the second wine not only has less concentration of color, but the color is more youthful. So if Madeline's first wine was more straw colored, this one is more deeper straw or yellow colored. This one is more classically straw and lighter colored. The green really pops in this wine as far as the overtones, and green always suggests either cool climate, youth, or combination thereof. And as I swirl it around, it's moving fairly quickly in the glass. It's sheeting more than it is tearing, which, presuming your glass is in a clean state, that's interesting information. But as we know, all the fun is in the nose and in the mouth, so I'm going to hop right in there. And as people know, I always tend to look for just a few things in wine, and few is my acronym for fruit character, earth character, and wood character. Those are sort of the 3 general channels of discussion that one should be having. And when I talk fruit, that means anything that comes out of the ground. So that could be fruit, that could be vegetables, that could be herbs, etc. Earth is literally that organic or inorganic character of earth. And then wood, of course, is any appearance of wood influence or not in the wine. And then there are, of course, the other players to be named later, most of whom will start at third base tonight for the San Francisco Giants. They have injuries. No, that was just a joke. Okay, so what do I get here? There is fruit in this wine. I wouldn't say it necessarily is the driver here, but it is definitely pronounced, and it's definitely very precise in nature. I'm picking up tart characters of fruit. Those that tend to be in the citrus vein are probably more sort of a sharp lemon, more eureka, maybe a little bit of lime zest or something like that in it. But it really is about sort of appley character, green, maybe tart yellow character. That could be pear. Apples and pears are relatively close for a lot of people, and one person's pear is another person's apple. I'm also getting a quince element to this wine, and I'm getting definitely other elements of fruit. So stone fruit for sure comes off to me more kind of as a slightly just ripe or fresh nectarine, white or yellow, maybe white peach, not as rich as apricot and not as rich as yellow peach. There are some tropical elements to the wine, a bit of passion fruit, perhaps, maybe a little bit of slightly unripe pineapple. And then I'm getting a bit of herbal character here. So I'm getting a little bit of verbena. I'm getting a little bit of, dare I say, almost a soft mintiness to the wine, but that's very, very soft, maybe too Evan geeky. There's some elderflower. There's definitely some lemon blossom. There's definitely some apple blossoms here, and almost a sort of slightly, can I say this, like a sort of steely smokiness to it, which comes off to me as sort of Lysias or whatever. I don't think it's oak related at all, but it's definitely soft and in the background. And then as far as oak goes, if there is oak here, it's probably large, quite old, and they're more for style than anything else, and perhaps a very light oxidation. Let's go ahead and mouth it. Right off the bat, as far as flavors go, before we get into structure, pretty consistent, very much in that sort of appley vein of things. And again, that sort of just fresh stone fruit character, a little bit of that light tropicality. Again, a sense of herbs. Maybe there's just a hint of chamomile in there as well too at the very top, lifting. And then definite earthiness. There's sort of a sort of stony, dare I say, almost slaty kind of minerality to it, and no oak whatsoever. If the oak is there, again, it's sort of a side note, a sidebar, stylistic, but not important to the wine's style. Now, if we get into the texture, the very first thing that I get is this sort of play, this yin and yang between at once very high acid, but also residual sugar. So there is some tactile sweetness in the wine, and the difference between this wine being super fruity versus sweet is exactly that. The sweetness lingers in the palate, whereas if it was just sort of super ripe, it would hit you and then it would go away. This wine, hence the term residual sugar, it's longer. But the acid is so high that it doesn't come off as cloying whatsoever. The weight on the wine is probably light medium minus in weight, probably medium. And the length on the wine is 3 weeks of length on the wine. I'm getting it's going on and on and on and on and on. And the texture on it is fairly lean, even though the sugar definitely rounds the edges off there. No phenolics, no tannin, and a lot of complexity. And I'm also just getting a sense right off the bat, as I swirl it, this is a wine you should go back to in about 20 minutes. It's just starting to unravel right now. It's a very, very young wine, as reflected by the very strong green overtones or undertones in the visual.
Evan, would you call this medium dry, or?
I worry a bit about that. Medium dry to me would come off as sweeter than that, sort of in that Habtrocken thing. I think this is a little bit less sweet than that to me. And realize too that oftentimes when you're dealing with sugar scales, particularly if you're in the old world, you're going to have sugar scales that overlap. And one person's interpretation of something may be at the top end of one, the low end of somebody else's. So I don't really focus on it too much, but I would say it's definitely off dry and then go from there.
And you can even, if I can jump in there, because people are always wondering what's the right thing to say, especially in exam conditions. Tell the truth. This has, a skosh, a titch, however you want to call it, depending on where you live, of residual sugar, but just a touch.
All right, so where could we be? We talked about Chenin before, and Chenin is indeed sort of an appley tropical type grape. It's got a lot of texture and weight, depending on where it is in the world, and it always gives me this sort of underlying character of juicy fruit gum from Wrigley's. So ask yourself that. Second thing is Riesling, of course, and we know what Riesling has, a lot of stone and or citrus fruits to it. Can be off dry, can also be bone dry, as we know. Semillon, as its own varietal or blend, tends to be quite textural and rich and round, unless you're down under in Australia, where it tends to be even meaner than most of the Sauvignon Blancs down there. But it tends to have more of a kind of almost sort of a riper, figgier type character. And then other, France could go with Riesling or Chenin. Germany could go with Riesling or Riesling. Argentina would probably be in the Semillon vein, although there was a little bit of Riesling there too, and Chenin. And Australia could play all of those games there. So think about, first off, do you think about it as old world or new world? And then sort of work backwards from there, identifying your grape and geography match.
Evan, do you see a lot of minerality or earthiness in this wine?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, and it comes off to me as distinctively almost sort of, I use the word slaty, somebody else might say rocky or whatever, but it's definitely there. And it's buried a little bit under the texture because the sugar adds this sort of soft gloss to that. If you go back to the wine that Madeline had, which has a distinctive, almost chalky minerality to it, this wine has that same thing because you painted it with a little bit of sugar, it sort of fills in the gaps, but underneath there, it's quite strong.
Thomas said that he picked up a bit of petrol. Do you pick that up too?
If it is, it's very, very nascent at this stage. But I could understand that. So that minerality, a character could be there. That's something that, by the way, grows with time. And as I've sort of described here, this wine comes off to me as extraordinarily young. So I might not expect as much of it at this point in time, particularly for an off-dry wine. But time will tell. But I don't think that's a bad call.
If it sounds like I'm stalling, I am, because the participation rate is at a low
Guys, vote.
55%.
Jeez
Come on,
Louise.
guys. Evan, one last question, and then we're going to reveal the thought that it could be a Gewürztraminer. What do you think of that?
Well, that's an interesting question because Gewürztraminer manifests itself in different parts of the world. At one extreme, like what you might find in Alsace, and certainly in most parts of the New World, be it Gisborne in New Zealand, California, etc., they tend to be extraordinarily floral, very full of what they call terpenes, and also very sort of spicy, but in the sweet sense. So it's not like, capsicums, but it's more like sweet spices, brown spices, and things like that. And it's fully aromatic. And I'm not getting fully aromatic here in as expressive, vocal, and loud sense as I would expect from a Gewürztraminer. Having said that, the only way I'll take take that back is in the native Tramin, which is in Northeast Italy, where Traminer comes from, and before it migrated to other parts, Traminer there, aka Gewürztraminer, is much less expressive than it is everywhere else in the world, but it's still more expressive than this.
Evan, we have a 96% call on Old World, but it's split between France and Germany. So that is interesting. And a 62% on that Riesling. So I think that we're majority on Riesling, but majority on Old World. And as we go, maybe talk about the differences between Germany and France.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, they're right next door to each other, and depending on what year and what war, one's one, one's the other. Sounds awful to say, but it's true. And Alsace was part of Germany for a long period of time, got independent, went back, etc. But Alsace wines, the most important thing to think about there is, with rare exception, Vendange Tardive and Sélection de Grand Noble, those wines are dry. Bone dry. Okay, this wine, by our definition, comes off as slightly sweet, so it probably kicks France out, except in those two notable exceptions, usually which are accompanied by botrytis too, which might give you that slightly saffron honey character in the background, in addition to that fruit, and that fruit might be a little bit riper. Whereas in Germany, our other choice here for Riesling in the Old World, this is pretty much in that ballpark. So as we land here, that was a short, I guess, to Austria to Germany is not that far. A little puddle helper, right? We're landing here in Germany. We're landing in the Mosel, and we're landing specifically in the area of the Saar, S-A-A-R, which is a tributary off the Mosel River. And we're landing in the very, very highly reputable house of Weingut Forstmeister Geltz, Zilken. There's actually two Zillikens in that part of the world. Hence, they put the you just don't call themselves Zilliken like the other people do, but the Forstmeister Geltz. They are in the Saar, as I said before, and it comes from the very specific Rausch vineyard, which we'll talk about in a minute. This is a very new winery. They've been around since 1742, and they have been making wine consistently since then. Obviously, they had some problems during the wars, and they were bombed in World War II and had to essentially rebuild and start all over again. But they are in a very wonderful little corner of the Saar in this area called Rausch. And it's defined by being, one, extraordinarily steep. Everything is obviously 100% hand-picked in this part of the world, but a very sort of interesting medium gray, sort of slaty soil that literally is raw. I mean, the roots penetrate down almost 10 meters. So they have great precision and strength, and obviously are deeply rooted too. And they just do a great job. It's an 11-hectare vineyard, this Rausch vineyard. It is the Rausch Forstmeister Geld Zilliken's premier vineyard, of which they make an array of wines out of. This is their cabinet. Cabinet, by definition, has an Uxla level, or a sugar level, that's below Spätlese, but obviously above Trocken wine. It's got a whopping 8% alcohol, which is why it seems so light. This is a nice wine to drink an entire bottle of at a picnic and still feel like you can play Foursquare or hopscotch or whatever you want to do. It's about 60 grams per liter residual sugar, which puts it just in that nice vein of being slightly off dry, but again, pairing well with incredible amounts of foods that do well. And great vineyard, VDP. And what I love about this wine is that it's so old school. Right now there's kind of, Germany is in two distinctive camps. There's the old guard, and this wine never saw stainless steel. This wine is fermented and kept in 1,000 liter, giant foudres, old foudres that you can see right there. So it's kept on its lees, and that's that sort of smoky, leesy thing we talked about before, as opposed to this school these days that it's like it never even has seen oak to recognize a barrel, much less gotten outside of a stainless steel tank before. So it's got that sort of precision, bright, sharp, almost at times painful level of acid. This wine's been kind of rounded out by that oak. I think they do a great job. I consider this to be sort of a bit of a throwback winery. I miss wineries like this in a day and age where stainless is cheaper, et cetera, but these guys are old guards, the family there, younger and newer generation of the Zilliken family. And I just have always been a fan. I'm sorry that Tim's not here to do that. This is the kind of wine he loves, right? But it also ages. I would also tell you to go back and try this wine at the end of the tasting, because it'll really just start handing its slide. And even as a cabinet, this wine will age for a good decade and a half.
And
no problem.
And Bill just said that he has a 2013 Zilliken Goldstein Cabernet Riesling. If I could just make a request, we have some members of my team in the background. If you guys can help me look up the residual sugar on this one. Jerry's got a really good question to see how much under 12 milligrams it is. So
this particular wine?
Yeah.
It's 60 grams per liter, so it's 6.
6. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So
can I jump in, Limang? Because I really want to, especially for the folks who didn't get it. And there's no dishonor in that. I love to say one look at the label's worth $1,000, right? Blind is blind. So I would tell you that this is such a glorious example of sleek Mosel, specifically Czar Riesling Cabernet, that memorize it. Yeah. It is just a killer example of type. And let me just speak to the 2 or 3 things. That lower acidity will take you away. If you just zone in on the alcohol, it will take you away from let's say bone dry Riesling, or from dry Loire or off dry Loire Chenin, which will have at least 12 and a half. The acidity is just spectacular, and it fakes you out in terms of the amount of sweetness. Now there's strong florality. You don't even have to look for it. And that minerality is just melted into the wine. It is primal to me, if nothing else, really memorize it.
Okay, 2 things. Number one, just another one, interesting thing that's worth pointing out here, because we have the opportunity to do it. If you ever have an opportunity to try a Mosel wine and a Rhine wine, Rheingau, Rhine has some side by side. These wines are known if for stone fruit. This is nectarine, right? This is not apricot. And Rhines are definitely more apricot-y in nature, that sort of sweet apricots of the season and all that. And again, everything Madeline said, that's great. Now, by the way, as we hit wine 3, I don't want you to think that it's a red grape vinified white. So that's a little bit of a throw off thing to doing that, but it is of course a white wine. So for those of you who are going, oh geez, Evan, should I have a red wine in my glass? No, wine 3 is white too, and Madeline's going to walk us through it.
We have in the past done 2 whites and the rest
or
reds,
or
right?
rosé,
or port at the end, or rosé, but we're doing 3 and 3 today. So this is where the appearance, and thank you, by the way, for selecting such a just textbook gorgeous Riesling. Yay. This is where appearance gets to be really fun on whites, because you may have seen me looking at both 2 and 1 against 3 on an angle on a white surface. And all things being equal, if they were the same vintage, there's a little bit more of a clear yellow aspect to this. It's a darker color. So hold that thought. Again, to quote our sort of present in spirit friend Tim, there's a part of you that's desperate to know what the wine is, and what you absolutely want to control is your tendency to want to decide when you look at it or even when you smell it. So it appears to have a deeper yellow color that could be influenced by what bottle age and or oxidative winemaking technique, aka barrel fermentation or aging. And aromatically, this is very cool. On the heels of 1 and 2, this is a more subtle smell. And the first 2 things that occurred to me are ripe golden apple, and red apple, and Asian pear tree fruit, ripe but not sweet, just the essence of those apples, not high tone green. And also, some stone fruit, but maybe yellow plum, and a little bit of tropical fruit, but subtle, maybe, some melon, maybe a little bit of pineapple. And also I'm getting a touch of, I'm waiting because some people just walked in, and if you're getting ambient noise, I'm trying to get them not to yell, but that's okay. I'm in a store. There you have it. This is real. It is not memorized. Hold tight just for a second. I'm just telling them to keep their voices down. Also aromatically, lychee, I love that. Yes. Aromatically, I would consider at this point, has this been in perhaps neutral barrel? Because I'm not getting a wall of vanilla or baking spice. There is some plurality to this wine, but it's subtle. There's a little bit of an herbal element, but it's more like chamomile. And there seems to be a touch of inorganic earth, but it's not primal the way it's been on 1 and 2. But what I'm getting is this ripe, subtle character of a grape variety that's probably not as generally aromatic as the first two. And on the palate, all of that is being reinforced. First of all, the attack is such that the acidity is medium plus, but it's integrated. It also has weight. It sits on my palate with, just a nice, rich mouthfeel. It's round and cleansing at the same time, because that's something that came up earlier in terms of, can a wine have moderate plus to high acidity and still have this kind of texture? It's not waxy, but it's got a thickness to it. I'm going to take another sip. My personal trick on my second approach, especially to a white, because they're sometimes not as easy to pull out subtleties, I get a plumb line of flavor. The finish is long, but not extended. I do think that this wine has been exposed to neutral oak, or if there is new oak, it's a modest amount. The acidity doesn't command my attention, but I definitely think there's been extended lees contact in this wine. Some of you may pick it up as cheesy or other descriptions. I get it actually in the mouthfeel. And there is minerality in this wine, but it's I think more of not so much a whisper, but it's not the dominant factor in this wine. What are our options? So very interesting. Chardonnay, there it is, which we considered with Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris as having similar characteristics. Portuguese blend, or Portuguese white. And if you haven't had much experience with them, neither have I. I have played more with Portuguese reds, but we might be considering aromatic or neutral grape varieties grown in a number of regions of Portugal. So I won't be specific about it, because it really depends on maritime influence and altitude and the grape variety or varieties that are used. Some of them can be highly floral and aromatic, and some more neutral. And then Rhone, which could be more Marsanne, Roussanne, and or if you start tucking Viognier in there, then it pulls it into the aromatic zone. So I would say this is not an easy wine to deduce, but it is obviously high quality, and I think it's been exposed to a little bit of used oak, and I could use it as a Chardonnay alternative if it's not actually Chardonnay. So options from the old world, Portugal and France, France being Chardonnay and Rhone, then Chile and Oregon for Chardonnay and Rhone blends respectively, but largely Chardonnay, I would say. And how is the poll going? Have you guys gotten over your
not quite.
Can't be your hesitation can't be defended.
Actually, it's there. It's
I just remind people of anonymity. Nobody knows what you're voting. Nobody knows what you're voting.
Exactly.
It just helps us for conversation.
Oh, I
And-
love this. Look at this. This
Yeah.
is a
Perfect.
split.
A three-way
Three ways.
tie, as they
It's
say.
fantastic. And it is actually split between the old and the new worlds as well. Fantastic. So we're considering Chardonnay, Portuguese blend, and Rhone blend from either Portugal or France. So a heavier lean towards the old world. And then Chile, which would be for what? Chardonnay. But I'm really curious if those of you who thought this was from France, if you were leaning more towards the Rhone, particularly Marsan Roussan, or if you were in the French white Burgundy camp. So if somebody can speak up in the chat room after we reveal it, that would be dead cool.
Yeah.
I
I'm gonna
love
go-
this wine.
I'm gonna go ahead and go to the reveal, and Evan and Maddie, we do need to catch up so that we can give
No
Brett
problem.
the
Oh, sorry
attention.
about that. Yep.
No,
And
we're
then-
good.
Okay,
So,
we're good. So
yeah.
should I start talking about it, or do you?
yeah,
have
let's start talking
questions?
about it. Absolutely.
Okay, so, well, was there a comment or a question in the chat room?
No, I think that
Lee-Mei?
because it was such a three-way tie as we're
Mhm.
revealing, maybe
Mhm.
help them out as to why it is what it is as we're
You know,
going.
in terms of it being a white Burgundy, I don't think it has got, I think if it had oak on it, it would be slightly more overt and it would come across, with a little bit of baking spice presence. And if it were from the Côte de Beaune, it might even have a little bit of a reductive element from it. If it was from Chablis, I think it would have a strong minerality. We are in northern Portugal. We are in the Dow. I can't say it nearly as well as Evan says it. We are from what is made from arguably Portugal's best, or one of the best, white grape varieties, called Encruzado. Did I pronounce that nicely? I don't have tongue twisters today. That is known for producing full-bodied, dry whites that are age-worthy and respond extraordinarily well from barrel fermentation, barrel aging, and also lees contact. So you can see we are, the Dow, Evan reminded me that even though it is protected from the Atlantic, it's actually surrounded by three mountain ranges. So the maritime influence is mitigated, though the closer you get to the coast, some breaks in it might impact it. High altitude, so we're what? Up to 500 meters, 1,500 feet, give or take. And we are continental climate with plenty of rainfall. We are in an area that's actually just south of the Douro and is really known for killer Touriga Nacional, right? And Touriga blends. Thanks to Evan, I've had some experience with those. This has some bottle age. It's a 220. So can you go back to it just for a sec, just so I can see that? This is made by it's made by a producer that, yes, that actually embraces several regions in terms of their production. So they are relatively recent on the scene. They were founded about under 15 years ago, and they have wines that come from various growing regions. So we're not dealing with estate fruit, but we're dealing with very high quality fruit. And again, only about, I think 80% of the wines from the Dow are white. They're largely red. And this is an area that was dominated by co-ops until, their entry into the EU, in which case, there was significant encouragement for small family-owned and operated producers to come in. I think this is a gorgeous alternative to barrel fermented Chardonnay. It would intrigue me if you gave me to it. I don't know as I would strongly consider it being French, but boy, I'd say it's been influenced by it. I think, do we have another picture here? Do we have the guy who is the winemaker? So, my pullback on this is that this is moderately aromatic quality white grape grown in a region that encourages its age-worthiness and acidity, though by nature Encruzado isn't as inherently acidic as, say, Chardonnay. And takes to lees contact and barrel fermentation beautifully. I like this wine a lot. Evan?
Yeah, no, super. And guy looks so It's great. And yeah, and Cruzado is a grape that is a nice, for people you're trying to wean off Chardonnay into something like that. Any Encruzado based wines, primarily from the Dow, are going to be there. I would suspect there's maybe a little bit of Syria blended into this wine, just because that acid is a little bit sharper than what I would associate with pure Encruzado, but it's definitely Encruzado dominant. Without
Neither of
question.
us are going to really trust a Portuguese.
Yeah, I know.
tech
You've read of
sheets.
Portuguese tech sheets. I don't know, Evan. Yeah.
We're gonna
Anyway,
make little
I
airplanes
would
out of
love,
it.
and just as a nod to the importer who's on this call, we
Oh,
trust your
hello.
tech sheet. Just to say that.
Yes.
At this point, it's the halfway point. I have to say this, Evan. You know, for people like me who are not master sommeliers, if you feel like you didn't get the Pinot Blanc, you didn't get the Encruzado, it's okay.
But you got the Riesling, yay.
You're here to learn. Or if you got some grape, you didn't get the region, we are here to play. So if it's your first time, and I see that some of you are here for the first time, please don't get discouraged. And just like Bill is talking about phenolic bitterness, if you don't know what that is, over time, you will get this as you attend our sessions. And I'm really happy to hear from one of our folks in our audience here that they don't have the wines, but they're still learning a lot. And if you've not ordered in time, I hope you still come, because that is the point. We're giving you all the descriptors so that you can try to deduce and play along.
And parting shot on this wine, Limang, I promise I won't take longer than 30 seconds. I will tell you that there is a distinctive minerality to this wine. The terroir and the Dow is heavily influenced by pervasive granite or schist. And I want to read one thing to you. And by the way, remember I said, I don't know, as I bought a Portuguese white in Michigan. So don't worry about your being able to recognize it, just assess quality. They recommend it with bacalhau or salt octopus and olive oil, or fried chunks of belly pork. As a vegan vegetarian, I'm intrigued to just take a bite of either of those. So
belly pork or pork belly. It's a lovely, it's a delicious wine though. And
Very
one
high
that
quality.
just a lot of fun. All right, let's flip
My
gears
lovely
here.
master sommeliers, you have 30 minutes, 3 wines, 10 minutes.
We'll be fine.
Let's go.
We're good.
We're good. I'm gonna go through and just ask yourself really quickly on the first question: is the wine translucent or opaque? Translucent means you can simply see through it and read through it, and the answer would be yes. And generally, what does that mean? Thinner skin grape, cooler climate, etc. Darker, more opaque would be deeper skin grape, warmer climate, and all the associated things that go with that. Let's focus now on the nose and on the mouth of this wine. And right off the bat, it's gorgeous. But if you look at our fruit, earth, wood triangle points, I would say that this wine definitely has fruit, but it doesn't have that sort of rich, ripe, juicy, effusive fruit that you could find in some red wines. It's more subtle. It's more of a matte print, not a glossy print, for those of you who are photography buffs. So it's more red plum, red currant, red cherry, black plum, black raspberry, but in a sort of softer, more matted way. There are definitely elements of herbs to the wine. I'm getting laurel. I'm getting a little bit of bay leaf. I'm getting just a hint of like, I don't know, it's like some oregano, not oregano, but something like green herbs and things like that. As far as earth, I'm getting more of an organic earth than inorganic earth. It's not so much mineral and stone as much as it is sort of turned dirt and perhaps a little bit of forest floor element to it. There's definitely some wood here on it. As I pick up through the spice notes here, there's elements of like cinnamon, there's elements of sandalwood, there's elements of sort of a toastiness to it, red wine sort of way, not a white wine sort of way. And lots of complexity, just a lot of stuff going on, maybe a kiss of pepper, a little bit of tea leaf, and and maybe some citrus rind too, a little bit of orange rind, both dried and not dried. In the mouth. Consistent, reflective, bright, nice attack to it, excellent acidity. Carrying and sort of holding that structure through. The elements here are all subtle. It's an elegant wine. It's not a power wine that would help you start thinking perhaps a little bit about grapes. Some are more vocal, as I said, than others. Some are louder than others. The wine, from the standpoint of all the flavors, pretty much hits the dots of what we talked about before. There might be a slightly more licorice element to it, maybe in the mouth. Maybe there's just a small hint again of a mintiness in the mouth as well too, and that sort of strong laurelish character. It is more savory than it is fruity, if I could throw that one out there right now in terms of my perception. Structurally, we talked about red wines. We talked about the acid. Obviously, you need to talk about the tannins. And the tannins here are very tame. They're there. They're present. They pull a little bit, but they're not ripping. They're just sort of pulling. So I would call the tannins in this wine probably somewhere between medium to medium plus. I personally would say soft medium, either like a high medium or a low medium plus. You can sort of figure that one out. But if I were to give it a number, probably somewhere in the 6.5 to 7-ish range on the tannins, and they are smooth tannins. They are not hard tannins. They're not gritty tannins. They are not astringent tannins. Body weight, I would say this wine is probably medium full in body. And as far as length goes, I'm still tasting it, although it's again an elegant finish. It's a nuanced finish. It's not a power finish. It's somebody who's hitting for batting average, not for home runs. That's what I would say. If I was using a baseball analogy there. All right. So I've got a kind of vivid sense of what I'm thinking about with this wine. Li-Meng, if we move into our choices, trying to keep to your time frame, let's see where we could possibly go.
Yep. Shooting that up. Give me a second.
And again, if you look at your notes here, the oak there, yes, we described it subtle. Tannins are smooth, we described it. What could our choices be? Well, there is Pinot Noir. There's, of course, Gamay. They both share in common softer tannins and brighter levels of acidity. You have Barbera, which is, whether you're in California or Italy or wherever, tends to be fairly deeply pigmented, quite rich, but also extremely sharp acid levels and, again, not super hard tannins. Your choices that you could associate with, then obviously there's always other. It's always fun to hear what, if you didn't pick one of the grapes we had, what did you think? Because that can make for fun conversation. And then, of course, you could connect the dots between Pinot Noir and Gamay in France, Barbera and Pinot Noir in Italy. You could have Pinot Noir or Gamay in New Zealand. You could have all those players in Oregon. And then again, you could go somewhere else.
All right. So we are at about 50% participating here. I know it's the first red wine. And for the other, definitely tell us what other you're seeing. Let me see if in chat we're seeing some of these guys.
Somebody said Sangiovese, Chianti Classico.
Sangiovese would have the acid. It would probably be a bit more rustic by definition, particularly if it were coming out of Italy. Tannins would definitely be firmer and harder. Depending on where you were, maybe if it was a basic Chianti, it might be soft like that, but it wouldn't be as complex as this wine is. So it's sort of hard to get a level of complexity like this. You'd have to probably be more in the Rosso or the sort of Montalcino area, maybe a really good Il Nobile di Montepulciano. But again, you just don't have the structure and the architecture for that. It doesn't scream Sangiovese to me.
What about Merlot-based Bordeaux?
Well, the color really doesn't suggest it's too, I mean, unless it was a very heavily cropped Merlot, it would have more color than that. And the nature of the fruit here, unless it was on more on the underripe side, is probably a bit too red and not quite dark enough for me to be a Merlot, although I can understand from the tannin characteristics why you might think that.
All right, so I'm going to share the results that I'm seeing. I think that we're getting closer to 50-50, 60-40 on old world and new world, but people are still a little reluctant to go to the new world. So let's reveal, and we can talk about how, Evan, it would be helpful. What would be helpful in this wine to figure out new world versus old world?
Well, it doesn't have a tremendous amount of earth, right off the bat. So I think that's something that I would be paying attention to here. In the nature of the earth that it does have is more that sort of inorganic sort of earth and potting soil. It doesn't have that minerality. If you go back to those first three wines, all of them had a distinctive sense of quote unquote place to them. This wine is really more about the beautiful nature of its fruit, as we had back to the New World and heading back to the western part of the United States, that would suggest something that's from a probably a slightly maybe warmer climate, but also just a different expression of a fruit character. Here being more on that more matte thing, which again maybe leads some people to the old world. You're not expecting a fruit bomb, but it does have fruitiness to it. So we're actually here in Oregon, and if you were going to describe any New World wine as being European, Oregon is a good place to go. New Zealand, by the way, is also a good place to go, specifically with the Pinot Noir variety, which is what this wine is. So you're going to have red fruit driven. Pinot Noirs that come from both Oregon and from New Zealand tend to be more savory and less fruit forward than those coming out of California. Ponzi Vineyards, where this is from, which is located in the great state of Beaverton, as you're driving north out of, driving west out of Portland, as I should say, is one of the first places you hit, first quality wineries you hit. And I'm very emotionally attached to this winery. When I was dating my wife, Barbara, this was our first professional field trip together. And what is now their office used to be a crow's nest guest room overlooking the vineyards there. Dick and Louisa Ponzi, who started this winery in 1970, were truly among the pioneers in that. There were the Dicks. You had Dick Erath, Dick Ponzi. You had the Daves. You had David Adelsheim, etc. And they are pioneers in this area and have been making estate wine forever. Their daughter Louisa heads up all the winemaking today, and she does an exceptional job continuing in her father's footsteps making wine. Dick's just a tremendous guy, fun. Nancy's fabulous. Dick, actually, I used to say, what was my biggest thing for selling this wine? Dick's first job before he got into the wine business was an engineer designing rides at Disneyland. He designed Pirates of the Caribbean. Isn't cool. That so? I sold more wine based on that story than I probably did based on the extremely high quality of the wine. This wine comes from, as you can see, the Laurelwood District, which is a sub-nested area within the Greater Chehalem Mountains, AVA. Again, it is in Beaverton, so closer to Portland. And they were the people. It's an AVA, technically Laurelwood, although I don't know if it passed at the time they put it, which is why they probably put district here. But the Ponzi single-handedly got this AVA passed, which is quite extraordinary. They were also the first winery to get a serious write-up in the New York Times in 1979, helping put the winery in Oregon on the map. Winery was acquired by Bollinger in France. That's happening a lot these days in American wineries. In 2021, although the Bollinger people are smart, they leave these guys alone, and Louisa is just doing her thing. They own 130 acres of certified sustainable land. That's Louisa there in a wonderful semi-polarized state, doing a great job, and just a fabulous winery, fabulous people, superb quality. And I love this sort of exoticness of what's going on. So you've got Dick on the far right. You've got his wife, Nancy, there on the far left, Louisa next to Nancy. Don't know who that other person is, but that's okay. Can't know everybody. And they're just doing a remarkable job there. We love the Ponzis, and they make great, not only Pinot Noir, but killer Pinot Gris, great Chardonnay, and just one of the first families of the Willamette Valley.
Awesome. Awesome. Beautiful wine. We've got a lot of good comments on this wine as well. All right, Maddie, you're on wine 5.
I'm on, but I want to give a shout out to Akeem. He was considering Chianti Classico because he got potpourri on the nose and the palate. And I love that because smelling it, there it is. It's dried flowers. And also
it's exotic too.
It's exotic. Gorgeous. And plus it's got muscles for a Pinot. This is one that's age worthy that can handle some bottle age, even needs it. So in any event, okay. I am paying attention to the chat room, and I like the fact that you guys are starting to be more expressive there. Questions to consider the whole red, black, or blue fruits. There's a running joke in the community that, sommeliers that are starting to blind taste go in and wipe out all the jars of jelly and jam from Kroger's or wherever you're buying your stuff from, and bury their noses in all of the produce. The tannin level. So I say tannin quality here. So you can quantify the tannin as medium plus, or high, but really zoning in on how the tannin feels specifically. It can be medium plus and be fine grained, like wine number 3. It can be moderately drying, or it can be so hard that it shuts the wine down. So
I'm showing the
the
color.
Mang is reminding me about the color. So, you know, put your finger underneath it. It's almost opaque. You can barely see your finger. You definitely can't see through it. And the center is a true, very dark ruby red, and it lightens to a rim where the hue hasn't really changed. It's sort of a pale ruby. There's absolutely no yellow in it. And if you move the glass, it is adhering a bit, which is giving you an indication of a thicker skinned grape variety or varieties, and also youth. So aromatic,
Bless
God
you.
bless you.
Thank you. Sorry. Shamut.
God bless you. To my own point, immediately I get both red and black fruit, perfectly ripe, not overripe. So what specifically? I mean, the whole raspberry character, because raspberry is such a cool grape that can incarnate both as red and black. Ripe red cherry and red plum, black cherry, black currant, perfectly poised, and even possibly a little blue in there. And then the other thing I immediately get is a little bit of cedar or cigar box that can be resulting from a grape variety or from treatment of, you know, oak aging. There is a cool mintiness to this wine that is distinctly herbal and very attractive. And also a faint hint of pyrazine, but it's not overt bell pepper, you know, but it is in there and probably more closely related to the black fruit than the red. I asked the question about flowers. The more and more I taste, I actually look for flowers, whether they're fresh or dried in reds. And this to me is, you know, lavender, violet, sort of dark flower potpourri, if you will. And again, a little bit of earthiness in the form of maybe mushrooms or truffle, but it's not a strong aspect. And aromatically, in terms of organic or inorganic earth, I think married to the cedar cigar box, there's a bit of a florist floor character to it. But I love the nose. It is, I'm making myself take it on the palate because it's intriguing. It's obviously a young wine, but it's complex, even at this stage of the game, which speaks to what? Quality fruit. On the palate, at least at this showing, at this moment, because remember, it's like meeting people, you know, 5 minutes. Speed dating and trying to make a call in terms of their character. I get more of a red fruit character on the palate, followed by the black fruit. The structure is really neat because it is not acid deficient. If I really zone in on the sides of my mouth, it is gently mouth-watering, so medium plus. The tannin is medium plus, but again, I would say moderately drying. It is not fine-grained by my measure at all. However, it's not what I would define as hard. It is the example of a red wine that is young and of a grape variety or varieties that bring significant amounts of tannin to play, certainly more than in wine number 3. So the palate is slightly short, but that is not a reflection of anything missing. It's just a young, rich red that displays both ripe red and black fruit, dried dark flowers, organic earth element in the form of mushrooms and truffles, a little bit of more inorganic earth too, a rockiness on the palate, especially the finish. The oak intensity, it's so beautifully calibrated that I almost forgot to mention it. There is sweet oak spice, but it's not overt. It's melted into the fruit and the other aspects of the wine. And important, especially I think in terms of deductive reasoning, the herbal aspect for me in the form of mint, and also just a kiss of pyrazine. Very well crafted, full-bodied red that's poised and elegant and young. I swallowed it.
Madeline, are you
There
getting
go.
chalkiness?
A little bit, but I think that's a combination of drying tannins and inorganic earths. So well said if somebody brought it up.
Yeah, it was from
Um,
Jerry. He said, would you call the tannins chalky?
You could, I guess that character is characteristic, or that adjective is something I use personally more in whites, particularly if we're talking about Chablis, but I can see why you would say that.
Mhm.
Right, and indescribable veggie quality. So that's what I've been sort of dancing around. Little cocoa and brioche for me, which would be what? Oak derived, in my opinion. So let's go to let's show these wines that we can all play together and participate in these polls, because I love the fact that people started using the other category. We've got what?
Yeah.
Grenache blend. We're good. We've got 15 minutes, Li Meng. I'm marching along at a
We're
steady
good.
clip.
We're good.
We've got Cabernet Sauvignon blend, which would mean either Cabernet or a
Straight or,
blend,
yeah.
dominantly Cabernet Sauvignon, and Zinfandel. And in terms of birthplace, Portugal, France, Australia, and Washington. Grenache for sure, France and Australia, Cabernet Sauvignon everywhere, but I would say with enthusiasm, from Bordeaux, France, Australia, South Australia, and Washington State, and Zinfandel. We didn't give a California option here, and that was
But there's
probably my
Zinfandel,
bad.
in Washington. There's a good amount of it, actually.
Good. I have
And
not
there's,
had any.
and there's Cabernet
allergies.
in the Teju in Portugal, a good
Well,
amount of
see, and this is why there are colleagues and teammates.
it.
So, how is I will remind everyone in terms of varietal deduction, Grenache will, unless it has a chunk of Syrah and or Mourvedre in it, tend not to look like this. And solo, it actually, with rare exception, tends to be on the translucent side and not quite as extracted in terms of adhering to the glass. Also, the tannin level would be milder, again, unless it had a significant amount of other grape variety or varieties blended in. Zinfandel, I think would be a little bit more one note. And what I mean by that, and this is born of deep respect for great Zin, it would have, I think, a stronger expression of an herbal or vegetable quality. I call it the bramble bush. Like you took the whole raspberry bush and shoved it into the bottle, and you get equal amounts of tannin and bitterness and acidity from the fruit and from that brambly characteristic. Shall we reveal the results?
Where in the world are we?
So here we are.
Huh?
There is a significant amount
Of Cabernets in here, about almost
and-
70% of Cabernet. And then we can also see that we are between Australia and Washington, firmly in the New World. And I think that the flavor profile, how fruit forward this wine is, probably is helping folks get there, right, Madeline, on the New Worldness?
I think so. And I think, what organic and inorganic minerality is in this wine is, tertiary, but I'm wondering what the other was considered. And I'm looking in the, Gamay is being considered, Gamay Cru. So Cru Beaujolais, again, much like Grenache, I think it would frankly look different. And I think it would be closer to, Pinot Noir, even if it hadn't had carbonic maceration. It would be closer to Pinot in its aromatic expression.
We're taking a puddle hopper.
We are taking
Another
a
puddle
hop.
hopper.
We are in the northwestern corner of the United States. We have crossed the, frighteningly long, broad Cascade Mountains, which act as a rain shadow. We are Sparkman Cellars. This is owned and operated by a gentleman, Chris, and his wife, Kelly. Chris was an amazingly well-recognized sommelier and general manager around the country, Commander's Palace in New Orleans, Michael's in LA, Todd English's Olives in DC, and McKay Restaurants in Seattle. Wow. He is currently the chairman of the Washington State Wine Commission. His wife partner is a background in wildlife biology and veterinary medicine. How cool is that? They are drawing on several areas of Washington for this cuvee. And to be honest with you, I don't know where I was going with that comment, but it is 82% Cabernet Sauvignon with splashes of Merlot, Cab Franc, Malbec, and Petit Verdot. So what regions are represented in this wine? We've got the broader Columbia Valley, but specifically Red Mountain, Snipes Mountain, and Yakima. And I encourage you to go to the website because they itemize the contracts that they have, which are growers that are recognized by all of us. Clipson, Kiona, Ciel de Cheval. And they laud vineyards, especially that are pulling back on their irrigation and proving that you can do high altitude, you know, desert viticulture, being modest in terms of how much you irrigate. It is pushing 15% alcohol by volume. And the reason it is called holler isn't because of some inspiration at 2 a.m. after several beers. The Aussies do that. But it is named after Red Hollow, the place where Chris's parents lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. I think that's gorgeously evocative. It was first produced in 2012, so it's been around for a while. But I tell you, what strikes me about this wine, it's a great shot of the two of them. And that's their winemaker on the left, Lynn Scott, is I'm curious what the price point is on this. And you may have shown it and I didn't
I
see
did.
it.
I'll go
32.
back to it. 32.
Wow, you know, try to find $32 worth of Napa Cabernet that's this kind of layering in its youth. And I'm not dogging Napa, God bless America, you know, but I think this is an example of an exceptional new world Cabernet Sauvignon blend. I could even call it, if I didn't know, you know, 100% Cabernet, because that's where its expression is. Though a little bit of that red fruit speaks to Merlot and such. It is showing the quality of its vineyard sources from the complexity, even in its youth. I like it a lot. Evan, how about you?
No, it's great. I mean, aside from the fact, Chris, the restaurant industry's loss was the wine industry's gain in this place.
Wow.
Chris is one of the greatest maitre d' floor sommelier people I ever met, period, end of statement. And when he decided to go into wine, I was sad for the restaurant business, but knowing his palate, he would be good. We call him Sparky. He and his wife are both from Tennessee. They're fabulous people. He makes great wines, and his entire portfolio is worth exploring for those of you who are looking at it. And, you know, I love the fact that, you know, Washington State still very much leans into the green of Cabernet Sauvignon. So much of
In
our
its
Cabernet,
best possible way.
yeah,
Yes.
in California has just gone so confected in many places and extracted and all that. And this reminds you of what great Cabernet is all about.
Only 35% new oak, and it's split between French and American, though it must be
Yeah.
well tempered, because damn if I can pick up American. And
Yeah.
look at that face, I would have bought any bottle of wine from him.
And his winery is in Woodinville, so I believe it's not in.
Yes.
So it's where you can go visit it too, which is great. All right, let's move on to the last wine, and we're going to kind of. I may run 2 or 3 minutes late, but we'll get through it. Just look at the wine; you can't see anything, right? This is a deep wine; it's opaque, and as you roll your glass, the inside of your glass becomes a very faded color of magenta. So I'm already expecting a big glass of wine when I take it to the next levels. It moves slowly, and like I said, it's got great extraction. Right off in the nose, it is a big wine. And if you look at the fruit, earth, wood thing, it is driven by fruit, and it is driven by a really rich, deep, black, ripe, red, slightly blue character of fruit. It's jammy, but in the best of ways, conserved, not confected. It's plums, and it's blackberries, and it's I wouldn't say it's pruny, that sort of suggests desiccation and all that, but it's just pushing that uber ripe element of it. At the same time, it's got an earthiness to it. It's got a little bit of graphite, which is a kiss of mineral, but it's still really brooding and fruit. There's licorice, both black and red, but primarily black. For those of you like panda licorice, do you know there's panda licorice? We should get panda licorice for everybody. Panda licorice rocks. Black panda licorice, really cool, and just dense. The wine has just got such a thickness and girth to its nose, and just screams a little bit of pepperiness to it. And again, a little bit of earth. Okay, let's go ahead and taste it. And some oak, enough oak to frame it and set it off, but not over oaked whatsoever. And not a strong expression of earthiness.
Big wine. Love
It
it.
is a big wine. It speaks to all of the fruit characters there, but it surprisingly leans out in the best of ways. You're expecting this sort of rich, rolling, almost ripe, sweet monster to then creep across your palate, and then boom, it has minerality, and boom, it has salinity to it as well, which is really cool. The tannins are extremely well managed. It is a glass of wine. My chest is burning up like a jack-o'-lantern right now. And the oak is just there to frame it, although it's not too hard. And I'm getting just this soft, faint thing in the back palate that I didn't get before, which is this sort of slightly eucalyptal camphor-ish thing that seems to be a trend in today's wines, both in some of the whites and some of the reds. Gee, I wonder if he did that by design. Just a thought. See how certain flavors manifest themselves in different wines. And I'm definitely picking that up here. It finishes clean, it finishes smooth, it finishes long, but it goes from sort of this rich thing, boom, like that. So it just goes like that. If you think of wines as shapes, kind of like that. Very cool. And let's go ahead and in our few minutes, let's figure out where we are. But it speaks pretty straightforward to me in terms of its personality and in terms of what it wants to be. So, choices of fruit. We've got Mencia or Mencia blend, and Mencia is, of course, a grape associated with Spain and Portugal. It's called Mencia in Spain, where you find it in Bierzo, you find it in Ribera Sacra, and it makes a wine that's sort of at once somewhere between Pinot Noir and Cab Franc. Petit Syrah, which is not petite, but big, girthy, chewy, peppery, and often mean. There's nothing petite about Petit Syrah. Syrah and as a blend, so Syrah either pure or perhaps with other grapes. And then, of course, there's our friend Other. Spain, of course, makes sense for Mencia. Italy makes sense for Syrah. They actually grow a little bit. And believe it or not, a little bit of Petit Syrah too. Australia can play in all of those camps. California can play in all of those camps. And Other can play in the other camp. The other sandbox.
I'm gonna give just less than 60 seconds. So if you need to put your answer,
you should vote often, vote early.
Quickly. But I gotta say, people maybe by the sixth wine, they're all seasoned. The ones who have voted are going 77% for Syrah and 85. I don't know any region was with this much conviction. 85%. Are going down the Australia path. So I guess it's New World tasting.
Yeah, it's a very, well, I think it's a very classic example. So for those of you who might have gotten a bit frustrated on wines 1, maybe 3, possibly 5, I don't know. These last couple wines have been pretty much straight down the middle.
And here's a big hint for you. Here's a big hint. If you grew up with Bill said that this is a wine that he grew up with. So I love that.
All right, there you go. There you go. And again, Jerry's point, yeah, I mean, Rhone would have been a choice too, perhaps more minerality in the Rhone Valley and all that. But let's go ahead and see where we are. Let's jump in.
We're ending the poll right now. And I'm
sorry.
sorry.
All of you are going. Why did we consider
we're all in. We're all in. But, Petit Syrah, not an awful call. There are some Petit Syrahs these days that are made in a more restrained, not quite as
flamboyant.
Yeah.
meanly flamboyant a way as they used to, and all that. But we're predominantly Aussie in California, and that kind of makes a sense. Let's figure it out, and let's get on our plane. This is the longest plane ride probably of the day, but you've had 2 short puddle hoppers, Austria to Germany and Oregon to Washington. So now you can get on a plane, and this is probably what would you think, Madeline? 12, 13 hour flight, 14 hour
from there?
Yeah,
probably 18.
Yeah, probably not direct.
Class.
No, okay, guys, but here's the question, Evan. I have to ask you. You did 3 whites to start and all old world. Was it deliberate that you
absolutely
3 red wines all
absolutely unequivocally? First of all, I gave you 3 and 3. I don't always do that. Sometimes I do 2 and 4. And yeah, I mean, I'm just keeping everybody on your toes to sort of think like, okay, you got 3 white wines. How many of them are New World? How many of them are Old World? 3 red wines.
Can't play that game.
No, can't play that game. Don't play it. You know, we don't play that game. Here we are in Australia. We are down in the McLaren Vale, and we are with our friend Frank Mitolo and family. And just a lovely, lovely wine. I am on the record for saying that I'm more of a McLaren Vale Shiraz person than I am a Barossa Shiraz person. I think that it represents the vision of what people think of when they think of Syrah. Barossas, to me, oftentimes can be a little syrupy and a little bit too extracted. And I love the, I wouldn't describe the wine as having a softness, but there's a liveness to it within the volume of the varietal expression that you simply oftentimes don't find in Barossa, where they just seem to be going for volume and pedal to the metal. So here you are, classic McLaren Vale. So you're about 45 minutes south of Adelaide, which is the capital, of course. And they make sort of rich, hedonic, dense, ripe wines, but with lift. You know, and if the palate didn't give you that lift to it, along with that minerality, I don't know what it is. To me, it's the epitome of what Australian Shiraz is all about. It is made by the Mitolo family, rather. Miolo, those are Brazil. But the Mitolo family, Frank and family they're growers, they're farmers, but they're more known for their potatoes. They're one of the largest potato farmers in all of Australia and made their fortune there, and in fact sold most of their business because of the potato business to the Canadian Pension Fund. Who knew? This is actually a Canadian company, not an Aussie company, but their winemaker is a superstar, a gentleman by the name Ben Glaetzer, who makes his own wines and all that. And this, to me, is just one of the greatest values and most varietally correct values on the market.
This is a rich wine, but it's not heavy-handed.
Yeah,
the acidity is refreshing. And if some of you are going down the nerd hole and going, well, it's probably adjusted acidity, but you can't tell. It's so definitely
and I
you're
just love
closer to the water, right? So you've got maritime influence.
Exactly. Yeah,
McLaren
absolutely.
as opposed to
And
Barossa.
it's got a little bit of that, you know, again, for those people who are looking for that sort of Aussie eucalyptol thing, it's there, but it's not overwhelming. Like you might find in Coonawarra, like you might find in Barossa. It's just there. By the way, that is, for those of you who are geeks out there, cineole, Cineole, is what gives you the camphor eucalyptol thing, much like Rotendon does the peppery thing, etc. That's Luke. He is the day-to-day winemaker. Ben is still sort of the consulting. I mean, Ben's got so many freaking projects going on. I'm glad he handed off the day-to-day to Luke to make the wines, but this is just a lovely estate. They actually have a killer restaurant, I might add, that turns into a disco at night. Isn't that cool? Restaurant and discotheque.
I love the food and wine pairing that Carrie threw out here for pizza. I'd say Friday night pizza with this.
Oliver's Pizza. Oliver's Pizza in McLaren Vale is the go-to restaurant. So they do pizza and McLaren Vale Shiraz. So next time you're there, Oliver's Pizza, which has live bands every night, big old frickin' open fire pit, and really good wood-fired pizzas in McLaren Vale. There you go.
I have to say, these last three reds, you know, people are tossing out their faves out here. That's a tough call. There are some really nice reds in this.
And those whites are delicious too.
Well, the whites are delicious too. I'm just saying that the reds
back to your Riesling. Back to your Riesling.
But wait a minute, hold on. Pizza can be without tomato sauce. It can be, white pizza with herbs and cracker crust, in which case you could beeline to all of them. But I would vote for the Encruzado #3.
Yeah, there you go.
I think, Evan, one last question. Thomas had a great comment here. He thought that a Shiraz from Australia would have been more peppery. What do you think of that comment?
Depends on where you are. Cool climate Shiraz for sure. If you're in the Yarra, if you're in Great Western, if you're in places that are known, Mount Langley, etc., for those, then you're going to get that super cracked back black pepper. Eat an entire thing of peppercorns pepper, but you know, again, Shiraz's pepperiness will be, I don't want to say burned off, but will be diminished when you get into slightly warmer climates. This is like perfect. This is ripe, but not overripe. So you have an undercurrent of it, but it's not going to be like, you know, Mount Langley, right? I mean, Mount Langley Giron is the epitome of cracked black pepper. This is not that wine. That's a much cooler climate Shiraz.
Thank you. I love these comments. Thank you, Christy. Even if you're out for the summer, there are a couple of things that you can do that I want to hone in on. You can always ask us to hold. I will be sending out an email to everybody. As the heat comes, you are able to say,
I want my kits, but hold it in my personal locker in your cellar for me, and we will be happy to ship you all those kits come September when it cools down. The other benefit is if you are an annual or a monthly subscriber, not just a webinar purchaser, we will ship to you with our next day air when the weather warrants it. So we will pick up the cost of that next day air if you're a monthly. I know some of you are in Arizona. We're going to start shipping you with ice and next day air for the next few months as things get way too hot, so that you can continue to taste with us. And everything, of course, will be recorded. So be a monthly or annual subscriber to get that benefit. But if not, you can always add on fast ship to your webinar kit. I think Tracy or someone on here wanted to get the webinar kit. Get it now, $143. I believe on the page there is a link to the there's a link to what is in that kit. But of course, if you're trying to taste it blind, don't look too hard.